10 Nordic secrets to keep your life calm and balanced. Buddhism. Imagine a life where simplicity reigns, where balance and mindfulness become the foundation of daily existence. This is not just a dream, it's a philosophy deeply rooted in Nordic culture, which resonates beautifully with the timeless wisdom of Buddhism. In today's video, we'll explore 10 Nordic practices and their parallels with Buddhist teachings. Together, let's illuminate the path toward calm, clarity, and harmony. 1. Embracing the philosophy of enough. In a world often driven by excess, more possessions, more achievements, more everything, the philosophy of enough offers a profound yet simple liberation. In Nordic culture, the idea of enough isn't about settling for less or embracing mediocrity. It's about recognizing the beauty and sufficiency in what already is. This mirrors the Buddhist principle of santuthi, contentment, a state of being that arises when we stop craving for what we don't have and start cherishing what we do. Imagine yourself standing in a quiet forest. The air is crisp, the leaves whisper ancient secrets, and the sunlight filters gently through the canopy above. You don't need to own the forest to feel its peace. Its presence is enough. This moment, just as it is, contains everything you need to feel whole. Yet, how often do we rush past such moments, caught in a relentless chase for more, as though happiness lies in the next purchase, promotion, or milestone? In truth, this chase only distances us from the very peace we seek. Buddhism teaches us that the root of suffering is tanha, craving. Craving whispers that what we have isn't enough, that we ourselves aren't enough. But when we embrace the philosophy of enough, we silence this whisper. We begin to see life not as a list of things to acquire, but as a tapestry already woven with richness and meaning. It's in the simple joys, a shared meal, a kind word, a quiet moment, that we find contentment. Ask yourself this: what is truly enough for me today? Close your eyes and let this question settle within you. Is it the warmth of a loved one's smile? A moment of stillness amidst the busyness of life? The breath that flows in and out of your body, unbidden and unearned, yet freely given? Release the endless striving for more and rest in the sufficiency of now. In this resting, you may discover that enough is not a limitation, it's freedom. 2. Humility and modesty, the Nordic way. In the heart of Nordic culture lies a lesson that resonates deeply with Buddhist philosophy, the quiet power of humility and modesty. In a world often consumed by the noise of achievement and the race for recognition, the Nordic way offers a gentle reminder to step back, breathe, and simply be. Their approach is not about denying success or hiding accomplishments. Rather, it's about living with a sense of grounded authenticity, free from the need to impress or dominate. This mirrors the Buddhist practice of right speech and right view, a commitment to speaking truthfully and perceiving life without the distortions of ego. Humility, when understood in its essence, is like a candle in a dark room. It doesn't shout about its presence or demand attention, yet its soft glow transforms the space. It provides light not for its own glory, but because that is its purpose. Similarly, true humility doesn't seek validation or applause. It exists in quiet strength, fulfilling its role in the world with grace and simplicity. When we reflect on our lives, how often do we measure success by how others perceive us? Imagine instead celebrating your victories in silence, feeling the fullness of your achievements within, rather than displaying them for approval. What if the joy of meaningful living became the true marker of success, rather than the trophies on a shelf or the applause of a crowd? This shift doesn't diminish the value of your efforts. It amplifies it because it centers your happiness in something unshakable, your inner peace. Humility invites us to find beauty in the small, the unspoken, and the ordinary. It reminds us that the tree does not boast of its fruit, yet it nourishes many. The river does not announce its journey, yet it sustains life wherever it flows. So too can we move through life offering our light and gifts without expectation, trusting that their value is inherent, not dependent on acknowledgement. Let's pause and ask ourselves, what would life look like if we let go of the need to be seen, and instead found the quiet contentment of simply being? In the stillness of that thought lies a profound truth. The most radiant lives are often the ones lived humbly, with purpose and authenticity, far from the clamor of the world. 3. Thriving in extreme conditions. In the Nordic way of life, thriving in extreme conditions is not merely about survival. It's an art form, a philosophy deeply ingrained in their existence. From the blistering heat of a sauna to the sharp, icy shock of frozen waters, they have learned to embrace nature's extremes with grace and resilience. For those of us seeking a deeper connection to life's challenges, this practice offers a profound lesson. Resistance creates suffering, but surrender unveils strength. In Buddhism, this aligns beautifully with the concept of mindful detachment. Imagine standing at the edge of a cold river, its waters symbolizing the inevitable hardships of life. Your instinct might be to avoid it, to cling to comfort and certainty. Yet what if, instead of retreating, you stepped in? Feel the icy currents wrap around you, not as an enemy to be fought, but as a teacher to be understood. In that moment, your resistance melts, and in its place arises a newfound clarity. You discover that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it with openness. Life, much like those Nordic extremes, will push you into discomfort. It will demand that you adapt, that you let go of control, and embrace what simply is. The heat of the sauna teaches us to sit with intensity, to endure moments of pressure, and know they are temporary. The icy plunge reminds us that sharpness and pain are equally fleeting. Both experiences, when accepted fully, transform into something beautiful. A renewal, a balance, a sense of aliveness. Today, I invite you to practice this art of surrender in your own way. Perhaps it's through a cold shower, feeling the water sting and awaken your senses. Or maybe it's sitting quietly with a thought that unsettles you, allowing it to pass through your mind like a passing cloud. Notice what happens when you stop resisting, how discomfort transforms into insight, and struggle evolves into strength. In every extreme lies an invitation to grow. Will you step into the river and discover who you truly are? 4. Preparing for winter, a metaphor for inner seasons. The Nordic winter, with its long nights and biting cold, could easily be seen as a time of hardship. Yet, in Nordic culture, it is not merely endured. It is embraced as a season of transformation, reflection, and quiet beauty. In much the same way, the winters of our inner lives, those periods of stillness, challenge, and uncertainty, hold the seeds of profound growth if we choose to welcome them with mindfulness and grace. Think of the darkness not as something to fear, but as a sanctuary, a space where the external noise softens, and you can turn inward to listen to the whispers of your soul. Like lighting a candle in a dim room, small acts of warmth, whether physical or emotional, can illuminate even the darkest moments. A single flickering flame reminds us that no night lasts forever. The dawn will come, bringing with it renewed clarity and strength. When life feels cold and barren, take this as an invitation to create your own winter rituals. Perhaps it's journaling under the soft glow of a lamp, pouring your thoughts onto the page like snowflakes falling gently to the ground. Maybe it's sitting in stillness, meditating on the rhythm of your breath as a source of quiet warmth. Or it could be something as simple as wrapping yourself in a cozy blanket, sipping tea, and allowing yourself to be present with the moment, free from judgment or expectation. Buddhism teaches us that everything is impermanent. The harshest winters and the deepest sorrows eventually give way to brighter days. But instead of rushing to escape these times of struggle, we are encouraged to embrace them fully. Within the stillness of winter lies the potential for renewal, much like a tree shedding its leaves to conserve energy for the spring. So when faced with the winter of your soul, ask yourself, how can I nurture myself through this darkness? Let this question guide you towards self-compassion and intentional care. Remember, the purpose of winter is not to break you, but to prepare you, to strengthen your roots, so you can bloom more vibrantly when the season changes. And it always does. Every winter holds the promise of spring. 5. Authentic social interactions. In a world often filled with noise and pretense, the Nordic approach to social interactions is like a breath of fresh air, a quiet, authentic presence that values sincerity over superficiality. Compliments in this culture are rare, but when they are given, they carry the weight of truth and kindness. There is no excess, no empty flattery, just simple, heartfelt words that resonate deeply. This mirrors a core Buddhist teaching, the value of truthfulness in speech. In Buddhism, it is said that words hold immense power, capable of building bridges or creating walls. Thus, we are encouraged to speak only when our words bring clarity, kindness, or upliftment to others. Imagine a still pond at sunrise. In the midst of its calm surface, a single lotus flower blooms. Its beauty is not loud or demanding. It does not seek attention. Yet its quiet presence transforms the entire landscape. Such is the power of authenticity in our interactions. When we engage with others sincerely, we create ripples of genuine connection, much like the lotus's reflection in the water. Authenticity also invites us to let go of the societal pressure to always impress. There is no need for grand gestures or excessive compliments. Instead, focus on the truth of the moment. What do you genuinely admire about the person in front of you? Maybe it's their resilience, their kindness, or even something as simple as the way they smile. A sincere compliment, no matter how small, can become a lantern of warmth in someone's day, illuminating their path even in moments of doubt. Today, take a moment to offer a genuine compliment, not because you feel obligated, but because it naturally arises from your heart. Notice how it lights up the person receiving it, creating a spark of connection between you. In that exchange, you may find a subtle but profound joy, a reminder that authenticity doesn't just transform others, it transforms us too. Let your words be like the lotus, a quiet yet transformative presence in the still waters of life. 6. Low hierarchy and equality. In Nordic societies, the idea of equality flows effortlessly through every aspect of life, creating a harmonious environment where no one stands above or below another. Workplaces reflect this beautifully, fostering trust and transparency, empowering every individual to contribute their voice without fear. There are no towering hierarchies or rigid roles. Instead, there is an unspoken understanding. We are all equal in our humanity. This resonates deeply with the Buddhist teaching of equanimity, the ability to view all beings as interconnected and equal in value, beyond the illusions of status or labels. Imagine a circle, unbroken and whole. Within this circle, everyone has a place, not determined by rank, wealth, or power, but simply by their shared existence. Respect flows like a gentle stream, unburdened by the weight of authority or the ego's desire to dominate. In this space, humility thrives. The leader listens to the worker, the teacher learns from the student. There is no competition for superiority, only a quiet acknowledgement of mutual worth. In Buddhism, this perspective invites us to go deeper. Look at the people in your life, not as roles, not as boss, parent, or friend, but as souls navigating their unique paths. When we strip away the layers of labels and expectations, we uncover the pure essence of connection. Your boss, who seems stern, might be carrying the weight of unseen struggles. Your parent, who appears unwavering, has their own fears and vulnerabilities. Your friend, who always seems cheerful, might silently long for understanding. How does this shift in perspective transform your interactions? Does it soften your heart, opening it to compassion and patience? When we embrace this view, something profound happens. The barriers we've built, barriers of hierarchy, judgment, and separation, begin to crumble. In their place, we discover a deeper sense of trust, a willingness to collaborate, and a joy that comes from simply being together. This is not just a philosophy, it is a practice. It asks us to pause, to see beyond appearances, and to treat everyone as equals, not out of obligation, but from a place of genuine understanding. So today, let us carry this wisdom into our lives. Let us enter the circle, unbound by titles and roles, and choose to meet others as they truly are, human, imperfect, and infinitely worthy. What will you discover when you start seeing the world through the lens of equality and connection? Perhaps you will find not just a shift in your relationships, but a profound transformation within yourself. 7. Teaching independence to children. In the quiet rhythms of Nordic life, there is a profound lesson in how children are taught to navigate the world. From an early age, they learn not just to master academic subjects, but also to cook, sew, manage money, and even build with their hands. These practical skills do more than prepare them for life. They cultivate a sense of independence and self-reliance that mirrors the Buddhist path of personal awakening. In Buddhism, self-reliance is not about isolation, but about trusting one's own capacity to grow, to learn, and to find the truth within oneself. Imagine a young bird perched on the edge of a nest. The nest is warm, safe, and familiar. But the sky, vast, boundless, and unknown, beckons. The parent bird does not carry the fledgling through the sky. Instead, it nudges it gently toward the edge, trusting that the wings, though untested, will soon find their rhythm. In the same way, we too must guide our children, our friends, and even ourselves toward that leap into independence. True empowerment lies not in solving every problem for someone, but in teaching them how to face challenges with confidence. A parent who shows a child how to bake bread, rather than baking it for them, gifts them the joy of creation and the ability to feed themselves forever. Similarly, a teacher who encourages students to ask questions, rather than simply providing answers, ignites a spark of curiosity that can light their path for a lifetime. As we reflect on this, let us ask ourselves, how often do we cling to the role of protector, afraid to let those we love stumble and fall? The Buddhist teaching of non-attachment reminds us that love does not mean control. Love means letting go, trusting that the lessons of life, both sweet and bitter, will guide those we care for to their own awakening. So how can we nurture independence in others? It begins with trust. Trust in their potential, even when it's not yet visible. Trust in their ability to rise, even after they fall. And trust in the journey, knowing that each step, each choice, and even each mistake is a part of their growth. Let us be like the parent bird, not carrying others through the sky, but showing them it is theirs to claim. In doing so, we honor not only their path, but the deep interconnectedness of all beings, where each soul discovers its light and shares it with the world. 8. Reducing income inequality. Imagine a river, flowing gently yet powerfully, nourishing every tree along its banks. The trees are of different shapes and sizes, some tall and strong, others small and fragile, but the river does not discriminate. It flows freely, giving life to all in its path. This is how Nordic societies approach income inequality. Through progressive taxation and free education, they create a system where resources flow to those who need them most. No one is left behind, and the collective well-being of the community becomes the priority. In Buddhism, this concept mirrors the principle of dana, generosity. Dana teaches us that giving is not about losing something. It is about creating abundance. When we share our resources, whether it is wealth, time, or knowledge, we nourish not just others but also ourselves. Like the river, our giving becomes a force of life that connects and uplifts everyone it touches. The beauty of this philosophy lies in its simplicity. You don't need to be wealthy or powerful to make a difference. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, or a moment of your time can have a profound impact. Generosity is not measured by the size of the gift, but by the heart with which it is given. The act of giving, done with compassion and intention, creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Now take a moment to reflect. How can you be the river in someone's life? Perhaps you can share your knowledge with a friend, help a stranger in need, or simply offer your presence to someone who feels alone. Every small act of generosity adds to the flow of collective abundance, making the world a kinder and more equitable place. Reducing income inequality is not just a policy. It is a mindset, a commitment to see others as interconnected parts of a whole. When we uplift others, we uplift ourselves. Let us embody the spirit of the river, flowing freely and nourishing the world with our compassion. In this way, we do not just create equality, we create harmony, peace, and lasting joy. 9. Parental leave and caregiving equality. In the Nordic world, the approach to parental leave is not just a policy, it is a living expression of compassion and equality. It allows parents to step into the most profound role of their lives with grace and shared responsibility. Both mothers and fathers are given the time and space to bond with their newborns, free from the pressures of work, financial insecurity, or societal expectations. This mirrors the Buddhist principle of karuna, compassionate action, where we act selflessly to alleviate the struggles of others and create an environment of love and understanding. Imagine, if you will, a family holding hands under a vast, starry sky. Each member, regardless of age or role, supports the others, forming a circle of connection that feels unbreakable. In this sanctuary, love flows like a gentle stream, nourishing each soul with warmth and security. This is not merely a poetic vision, it is the essence of what compassionate caregiving can achieve. It is in these tender moments, rocking a baby to sleep, sharing a quiet laugh, or simply being present for one another, that the seeds of deep, lasting relationships are planted. But let us pause and ask ourselves, how often do we truly offer such sanctuary to our loved ones? How often do we set aside our endless to-do lists, our distractions, our ambitions to simply be with those who matter most? Parental leave in the Nordic sense is a reminder, a gentle nudge to refocus on what is truly important, not the external achievements, but the bonds we nurture within our hearts. Today, let us make a conscious effort to embody this spirit of karuna. Spend uninterrupted time with someone you care about. It could be a child, a partner, a parent, or a friend. Put aside the noise of the world, your phone, your work, your worries, and truly listen, truly connect. Let your presence be a gift, a lantern that illuminates the shared space between you. In doing so, you will not only strengthen the relationships that mean the most, but you will also find yourself touched by the peace and joy that come from living compassionately. For in the end, it is these moments of love and presence that truly define a life well lived. 10. Failure as a teacher. A journey of growth and wisdom. In the stillness of Nordic culture, there lies a profound wisdom. Failure is not the enemy, it is the teacher. This perspective mirrors one of the most liberating principles of Buddhism, non-attachment. When we release our grip on outcomes and embrace each moment as it unfolds, we begin to see failure not as an end, but as a beginning, a portal to growth and self-discovery. Think of failure as a river. When we try to fight its current, clinging to the shores of fear and self-doubt, we exhaust ourselves. But when we let go, allowing the water to carry us, we discover its hidden rhythm. It's not the river that changes, it's our willingness to flow with it. This is the essence of non-attachment, learning to let go of resistance and finding clarity in what is. Failure often feels like falling during meditation, a jolt that pulls us from our focus, leaving us feeling inadequate. But in that fall lies an invitation. With each stumble, we rise again, steadier, more aware, and with a deeper understanding of ourselves. In the quiet space after failure, the mind can breathe, expand, and see clearly the lessons hidden within the experience. Buddhism teaches us that we are not defined by our mistakes. A failure does not diminish our worth, it simply points us to areas where growth is needed. When doubt creeps in, whisper this mantra to yourself: I am not my mistakes. I am the lessons they teach. Let these words be a lantern in the darkness, reminding you that every misstep is a step forward when viewed through the lens of wisdom. In life, just as in meditation, the process of falling and rising is natural. It's not about avoiding failure, but learning to stand up with grace each time we fall. The greatest strength lies not in perfection, but in resilience. In the courage to try again, knowing that each attempt brings us closer to clarity. Failure, then, is not an obstacle on your path. It is part of the path itself. It shapes you, refines you, and teaches you to see beyond the illusion of success and failure. It whispers the truth. Every moment, even the difficult ones, holds the seeds of awakening. Embrace them, and you will find that the journey is the destination. Nordic culture and Buddhism remind us of life's greatest truth. Peace is not a destination, it is a state of being. By integrating these practices into your life, you don't just find balance, you become it. If this video inspired you, let me know in the comments. What will you let go of today? And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, let's illuminate the path to inner peace.